Hello, everyone. This is William Del Pilar, and this is Fired Up Conservative Talk, where this conservative Latino digs into the ugly truth. I dig into what we need to hear, the topics we need to discuss. And with that, let's get right into it. Mamdani's people just swept three primaries in safe blue districts. And that is not some random local fluke. That is what happens when a generation gets raised inside a pipeline that starts in elementary school, gets reinforced in junior high, hardens in high school, and by college turns out voters and activists who are already primed to see socialism, communism, and anti American politics as normal. And let's be honest about how we got here. This did not happen because one side was asleep while the other side was brilliant. This happened because both establishments planted the seeds and then acted surprised when the crops came in. The Republican establishment looked the other way because too many of them were bought into the Chamber of Commerce worldview. Cheap labor, donor class priorities, and the lie that if you just ignore the cultural damage long enough, business will take care of everything. They confuse real capitalism with crony capitalism. And the Democratic establishment thought it could build this giant big tent by identity and rhetoric, assuming it could manage the radical element the same way it managed other identity blocks. Elevate a few leaders and keep the rest in line without ever actually delivering results and losing control of the radicals inside it. The gap between the elites and the working class has never been more obvious, and Trump 45's policies made that divide impossible to ignore by putting more money and leverage back into the hands of workers, the poor, and ordinary Americans. But the establishment didn't respond by understanding its job was to help Americans help themselves and keep the country moving forward. It responded by hating Trump for exposing the lie, the establishment class, their goals, and thus they wanted him gone. That's how you end up with a country where kids are not really educated so much as emotionally trained. They're taught that fairness means equal outcomes, no matter who worked for what. They're taught that history is mostly a story of American guilt, shame, and oppression instead of a serious account of how this nation was built and what it's given to the world. They're taught to look at America as the problem and then to confuse resentment with moral clarity. By the time they hit high school and college, a lot of them are already ready to accept socialism, communism, and anti American politics as if that's just the enlightened position. And the most infuriating part is who gets rewarded for it. A lot of the loudest radicals are upper middle class and mostly wealthy white kids with some brown kids who haven't really earned much of anything. But the politic gives them instant status, moral cover, and a way to play a revolutionary without ever having to build, protect, or sacrifice for anything real. Then you add illegal immigration, dependency politics, and multiculturalism without assimilation, and you get not just a social problem, but a political strategy. You're not just importing people. Now you're building a voter base that can be managed through government promises and identity politics. That's why this feels so Lenin-esque. Not because everything is identical, but because the pattern is familiar. Infiltrate the institutions, use the language of the system, normalize a radical position, and keep moving until the people in charge realize they no longer control what they helped create. And that is exactly what's happening inside the Democratic Party right now. Bernie went from being a joke to being taken seriously. Then Obama came with identity politics, and then AOC and the squad made the movement respectable. Then DSA moved inside the party. And now Mamdani and his people are winning primaries and showing the establishment that if it doesn't fall in line, it gets replaced. See hardcore progressive leftist Dan Goldman. Now, many should understand why the Tea Party movement mattered. It proved that ordinary Americans can still rise up, push back, and force the political class to move. For you doubters, we were made up and are made up of men, women, black, white, brown, yellow, with our mantra being limited government, fiscal responsibility, and equality for all, not equity. The question now is whether we can build on what Trump started and do it again, but bigger, broader, and smarter, reaching more Black Americans, more Latinos, the moderates who feel lost, and independents who want order, opportunity, and a country that works for the people, trying to build a life here. We are at a tipping point. This is just not another political cycle. This is a direct threat to the future of our country. And the most dangerous part is that the people in charge to make change, such as John Thune and rhinos, are still pretending this is a normal disagreement instead of a slow motion collapse. John Cornyn fits in there too. And that's why tonight matters. We've got 3 generations at this table because this fight didn't happen overnight and it won't be solved by one generation alone. The real question is how we got here, who helped create it, and what it's going to take to stop it before the damage becomes irreversible. And with that, let's bring in our panel tonight, Michaela Swaney and Jamie Miller. Hey kids, how you doing? You like that, Jamie, huh? Hey
I
kid.
did.
So
Great job.
Jamie used to be a regular of ours, people who has snuck under the radar and come in for another podcast tonight. Jamie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I have a 30-year career, mostly in campaign politics. The last decade or so, I live in Sarasota, Florida, and the free state of Florida. And um, about the last decade of my career has been working on long-term transformational projects here in Sarasota, which could include infrastructure development, uh, local parks, lots of things like that. I currently work as the vice president of communications for New College of Florida. You may have heard of New College, even though we only have 900 students, all the way out in California, because we were a recent topic of John Oliver's show on HBO this week tonight, where they tried to um, really talk negatively about um, Ron DeSantis's revitalization of the college, um, being more Ron DeSantis says his vision is the Hillsdale of the South. I don't know. Hillsdale's a private college, and we're a public university, so it's kind of hard to compare the two. But the goal is to teach, like you touched on slightly. The goal at New College is to teach kids how to think, not what to think. So that's where the indoctrination that did exist there and in many of our universities ends, and true intellectual freedom begins.
Outstanding. Jamie, and for the audience, real quick, in 20 seconds here, you were part of a moment in history, the Florida Recount. Tell us
Yes, I
in
was.
a few seconds a little bit about your
No,
experience
yes,
and
we could
voter
probably
fraud with
do multiple podcasts on that alone. I've sat down to write the book a million times, but I was director of field operations for the 2000 election for the George W. Bush campaign and the subsequent recount. So there's hardly anyone, including Karl Rove, who would know more about Chad's counties, memos. We had a Democrat attorney general at the time in Florida, one of our last statewide elected officials, who would just create law through a memo. Like it was crazy. Like, oh, this is now a vote. Well, no, that's not in state statute, but the attorney general would just write a memo and everybody would try to take it as law. Like it was a crazy time. As you know, William, Michaela, you maybe you certainly don't remember it, but it was 37 days and 6 million votes cast in Florida that year, and 537 separated George W. Bush and Al Gore, and effectively saved the presidency.
And I would say, Jamie, that Chief Justice Roberts learned from that Democrat because with the Affordable Care Act, he pretty much wrote his memo. It's a law. And
Yeah, you
boom, threw us in there with that nonsense. Michaela, tell us a little bit about yourself for the audience. I purposely sought out Michaela. She's really heavily into California politics. And I said, no, 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 you come on the national show because she represents the younger generation that Republicans struggle with and that Democrats seem to not be able to stop bringing in. So a little bit about yourself, Michaela.
Yeah, thank you, William. Yeah, there's definitely not enough of us in my generation. So I am, well, I'm 32 years old and I live in Placer County in California. And I am the legislative analyst for the California Republican Women's Federated. And I have been a business and legislative consultant for a little over 10 years now. So I've been kind of involved in politics, local government stuff, and more statewide stuff recently. And I'm also a small business owner and a mother of two young ones, two under two.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you
And
for having me.
for the audience, I saw her out after seeing some of her writings. I'm like, Federalist Papers, the Founding Fathers. I'm like, woo, that's some detail there for me.
Yeah.
So let's start right into this. You guys, I don't know if you heard my full monologue, but I'm sure you heard part of it. I did mention the DSA, which stands for the Democratic Socialists of America. I want to show you guys their their platform. It is incredible once you see this. Check this out, my friends. Can you see that? I assume. Do I need to make it bigger there? I see the old man starting to let me make it there slightly bigger there. How's that? So real quick, abolish the Senate, replace the president and Supreme Court, defund the Department of War, abolish the carceral state, which means to redirect police and prison funding to public services. So instead of getting the call out to send the cop, they're going to send a social worker who's going to get killed, and then there's no cop to help defend him or her. Free Palestine. They are big Hezbollah supporters. End sanctions on Cuba, Venezuela, and Iran. Look, we already want to end sanctions, except we want them to free their people to end those sanctions, something that people in America seem to always forget because they're living large versus the people actually suffering. Abolish ICE and grant amnesty for all. So, in other words, let's create today, tomorrow, and the future Democratic Party voter that will keep us in power. Public ownership of major corporations, including TSA. One of these candidates we're going to talk about did not want to have any type of pre checks and remake elections nationwide. They want to kill the Electoral College. My 2 cents on killing the Electoral College, we will be in a civil war within 15 years because what we're going to get is city states, as in the Greek era where Athens, Sparta, they had all the power. Real quick, let's start with the veteran of us, Mr. Jamie Miller. In all your wisdom, in all your years of politics, when you see this, what goes through your mind?
Well, I think it makes a good campaign ad is what goes through my mind. And much like Republicans nationalized Nancy Pelosi and her liberalism, the Republicans will also nationalize, you know, the DSA's wins in recent congressional elections.
Senorita Michaela, your thoughts when you see this platform? You have 10 years, you've actually got quite a bit of experience for somebody your age. What do you see when you see this platform?
Well, it's scary in one word. And I think, what stands out right now is how organized and effective this platform has become over even just the last few years. It's
I
escalated pretty.
Go ahead.
So I think this is what happens when a generation's taught to see America as fundamentally oppressive rather than exceptional.
Great point. Great point. So, what's the first thing that stood out to you, Jamie, when you saw Dan Goldman, you saw the victories uh, that happened there in New York City? What went through your mind?
Well, I think Republicans have have a lot of work to show people that our policies are representative of economic freedom, not economic oppression. And too many people, like Michaela said, I don't want to put words in her mouth exactly, but what I heard was kind of like, people are hearing that message and embracing it because they don't feel like there's a fair playing field. And there's not a fairer playing field in the world than the United States of America. You certainly can be the son of a Methodist minister and a social worker. And Michaela, when I was your age, I was running the grassroots effort for the recount for president of the United States. So that's not something that can happen in any other country in the world.
And Michaela, when you saw this story, what stood out? And also, for both of you, after I'll go to you next, Jamie and Michaela. So, what stood out? But also, does this feel like just it's just New York City, just a Democrat party, or does it feel like a party story that can go national?
Yeah, I definitely see it, especially being here in California. I mean, New York's first, and I keep telling everybody here that, we're next. California is next. We're gonna see this. I'm seeing it as I'm working at the Capitol. I'm seeing this slowly creep into, our politics. And the scary part is it's no longer one of those crazy ideas. It is reality here. And it's happening one bill at a time through our legislature.
Okay, so Michaela, what changed politically that, in your mind, that made this kind of result possible?
Well, I think it really just comes back to the educated citizenry. When you don't know history and you don't understand the real history, you're not being taught that in school anymore. I mean, back in my generation, in my generation, we weren't taught it at all. Everything I've learned was self-taught outside of the schooling system. That's what happens.
Exactamundo. It's Jamie. Sir Jamie, your thoughts on, does this feel like a city story, or feel like this is something that can trend national? And what changed politically in your mind that resulted in all of this happening?
It's not likely to go national unless it truly is a youth movement. And fortunately, it also seems like the youth are embracing a brand of conservatism as well. And so um, I'm not I'm not sure that it really goes national. It's not something that is prevalent in Florida, even in our most liberal counties like Broward and Palm Beach. Um, we do have it, like you suggested, William. It is an issue inside cities because people vote their pocketbooks. So it sounds great to freeze rent until you realize you can't fix the heater if you freeze rent. So what's the practical application of all these issues? A lot of them have been asked and answered throughout history here in the United States, and certainly with throughout history in other countries where these very issues have been tried and failed and failed and failed over and over again. And they will fail in New York City. They will continue to fail. They may take a little while to fail, but it is inevitable that they will implode upon themselves.
Logic, logically, I agree with you. Even realistically, I agree with you. But it takes at least 1 to 2 generations before, and I consider myself as part of the rabble based off my upbringing, for even the rabble to go enough is enough. And the reason I want to push back a little bit is this is perfect in this sense. Jamie, I didn't predict you would give that answer, but I predicted that's what that generation will give. It's not going to expand. It's no big deal. I'm not saying you're right or wrong, but that's why I wanted Michaela on to get her perspective. But Jamie, I want to push back a little bit on that with this one example. Nobody from my generation up ever saw Bernie Sanders as being taken seriously. And yet he went through 2 election cycles where the Democrats had to formulate a plan to take him out of the Democratic presidential primary. And the reason I bring that up is that's where I see your logic going, is not that you're wrong, but that's what we thought about Bernie. And look
Yeah,
where
as
it's
a
gone
as a
since.
general rule, William, we elect rabble rousers, or even if you want to call them extremists, to the House of Representatives. And as a general rule, those extremists don't win statewide elections to the U.S. Senate, which is why you have a 6-year U.S. Senate term. And it's a more deliberative body and things go there to die. It's more moderate. It's just built that way. It's built that way in every state and at the national level, as a general rule. So I do, for Bernie Sanders to be a U.S. senator. He comes from a little bit of a quirky state, so he's an outlier as a senator. But you're right. Like there's they had the opportunity to embrace these issues and they decided to cheat him out of a fair nominating process instead. And out of the two out of the three last presidential elections, Democrats have cheated their own primary voters out of a fair primary process. I don't know if they plan to do that again, but it's pretty apparent that they don't trust their voters to elect someone who they believe is electable.
I can't argue with you with that. However, I will point out to Javier Becerra, who is nothing but a yes man for whoever he believes is in power. Gavin Newsom came out yesterday with his let's tax the billionaire speech after he saw the results. Because prior to the results, he was, we can't have this billionaire tax. AOC, they're saying Chuck Schumer's running scared because AOC has the potential to win that Senate seat. They're saying she can win it. I say she has the potential because I do align a little bit with what you said. New York City may have the bulk of the votes, but all upstate would probably have a different story along with other factions in there. So I see your logic, but I also see the shifting tides in that. In response, Michaela, to what Mr. Miller said,
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, Jamie. I guess I just have like a different perception on everything because I was born and raised in California. And so I'm born in born into this state. So it's interesting, and I have traveled to other states and like Florida and Tennessee and Texas, and I've seen other places, and it's so crazy how different. I call it real America. Those states, because it's a totally different culture out here. And so someone like me, who's born and raised here and who's younger and sees this on a daily basis, I have a totally different perspective because I see it as, oh my gosh, we need to fight hard because we're going to turn into,
There's
common.
no question. There's no question. We need to continue to fight and fight
oh,
hard.
okay, but Michaela,
Yeah.
why do you have that different perspective? What has happened to you or you seen from your generation? Because on the flip side, this is the how I see the younger generation because the reality, I'm going to put my real quick 10 seconds in because it's not in my notes. So I don't want to forget. Because whether we want to admit it or not, as conservatives and Republicans, there is a housing issue. There is an affordability issue. And the people out there, especially the young, where a home costs, a starter home can cost $1 million in certain areas, we are ignoring those issues, the top leadership, the people who control our lives. And people may go, no, they're not ignoring it. Well, the results seem to show they are. So I'm not going to dispute the fact that, well, they're not ignoring it, William, but you can't dispute the results that they are. Is that kind of what has formulated your thought process? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of how I see the feelings coming from the young with my nephews and nieces.
Yeah, it's really just talking to my generation, not just my generation out here, the older generation out here specifically is very radical, very progressive. But I had the opportunity of working with a lot of these progressives in Oakland and San Francisco for about 8 years. And so that's where I kind of really saw it. Before I got into, working with Republicans, I've always been a conservative my whole life, but I wasn't so, out there conservative when I was living down there in Oakland in that area. And so working with those people specifically and seeing in these backdoor meetings and kind of seeing how their brain works and how, they push these, and they were more progressive Democrats, but they push these policies that are essentially not, and I've heard them say this a few different times. I think one of the things that stuck with me was when we were having so many break-ins in Oakland, and the only solution that I could see because they defunded the police was to fund the police. One of them told me that uh, the only solution she could think of was also funding the police, but the liberal in her is screaming when she says that because it would look bad to her constituents as, she's a racist. And so that's kind of their
Exactly.
mindset. And seeing that mindset, they're not for policy, they're more for how everybody looks at them. So they know their policies aren't working.
I
It's
call it feelings, feelings.
yeah.
All right, let's keep moving here. Let's keep moving forward here. So Mamdani endorsed three progressives, DSA aligned House candidates, and all three won. And the wins came in safe Democratic districts, which makes them easy to shrug off and hard to dismiss. Now, commentators are saying there's a clean sweep and a political earthquake inside the Democratic Party. Now, Mamdani does look like a kingmaker. Life isn't based about truth. That's what people need, at least in my opinion. I don't want to put words in my two panelists, but truth doesn't matter in the real world. It's perception, because Jamie sees it one way, Michaela sees it one way, I see it one way, and there's a truth floating somewhere. So we always try as honest people to get closest to the truth. So I agree with what I just stated. I'm not saying it's correct, but that's how it looks. How do you read a sweep like this, Mr. Miller?
Well, William, I always say there's 360 degrees of viewing an elephant. The view from the trunk looks a heck of a lot different than the view from the tail. So if you're explaining it to a blind man, you get a whole different animal, so to speak. So the sweep in New York, I think, is concerning. It is those folks, I think most of them are likely to go on to win the general elections. There may be one that has a little bit of a battle, but we'll see as we go forward. And and Michaela, to your point earlier, I'm concerned about Florida. Our governor's race this year. Elections are about who is running against whom. In 2 years there will be a major the electorate changes in a lot of these races, so the environment will change. Donald Trump will be effectively a lame duck going into his final year of his presidency, and so they won't be able to use that as much of a motivating factor, I don't think, um, especially in their primaries. So I do think that this is a um, likely the DSA elected candidates. The question becomes is how many can they get elected from Seattle, Chicago, the major, mostly northeastern cities, but Boston. And can they build a coalition in the U.S. House of Representatives to truly either drive policy um, from the Democrat side, or create a coalition large enough to drive policy through the U.S. House of Representatives as a whole.
And
With
Jamie,
three people, they won't do it. But
and I want to get into that a little bit deeper here in a couple minutes. So hold that thought there, because that is a question. What happens to the establishments if the DSA starts to gain power? And to your point, that's a lot of seats in Seattle, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in New York City, in Boston. Is it enough? But no, there's coalition building. But with one of the candidates who was semi-establishment, the controller of New York City, we'll get to him in a moment. He was a bit establishment crossing over. And as we just saw, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Gavin Newsom establishment, all of a sudden, the socialist billionaire tax, he's preaching and promoting it. Ro Khanna, long time show. He was never a moderate, but that's the road he tried to play. Now he's far left socialist, which is so ironic. The man has made over 200 million with the insider trading of Congress when he went in worth 40 million, and now he wants to be seen as a socialist. So once you get past the headlines, you have to ask what these people are actually saying they believe. So the DSA stands for the Democratic Socialists of America, and it represents the organized socialist left and side. We just saw their platform. We had three winners. One of them is Darielisa Avila Chevalier. I think that's how you say it. And she's the clearest example of the activist left winning outright. She beat an incumbent with explicit DSA backing, which shows that the movement can now take out sitting Democrats, not just pressure them. Her victory shows that explicit DSA backing is now viable in some districts, not just tolerated. And it's proof that the activist left is no longer just influence on the margins, meaning they're the outlier. It can now become electoral power. Now, here's some of her talk. Here's some of the things she's been accused of. She's been reported as calling the United States a bleeping disgrace. We want to keep this G-rated. A bleeping disgrace, and that's pretty anti-American. She said she wiped her hand on the American flag because she couldn't find a napkin or a towel or something to wipe it with. She's pushed abolitionist style rhetoric on borders, prisons, and police. calls to abolish ICE, defund the police, and stop deportations. She also helped form a pro-Palestinian group at Columbia that called for the total eradication of Western civilization. She's openly pro-Palestine and anti-Israel. You take it one step further in terms of what they call those people, and that's where she aligns. In other words, she's being tied to anti-Semitic rhetoric that aligns with Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. Then there is, oh, and she's deleted tweets. I guess thousands of tweets she deleted, which, I mean, we already know what she said on record. Imagine what she said in some of those deleted tweets. Then there's Claire Valdez, and she shows the same movement in a more durable form. Her open seat win matters because it suggests the DSA line, again, is no longer about headline grabbing challenges. It's about taking the seat. She's accused the federal government of sending billions to fund genocide. She pushes for the Palestinian liberation movement. She asks if we're ready to abolish ICE. She questions security. She's the one who questions security systems like the TSA pre-check, which is so dangerous. I mean, it's like carte blanche for terrorists to get through. There's also lots of clips tying her to rallies with Mamdani, DSA events, pro-Palestinian organizations where they call for the eradication of the Jewish state and Jews. And then there's an individual I want Jamie to get into a little bit based on what his response was in the last segment. That's Brad Lander. He represents what I call the polished version of this same trend. He wasn't formally a DSA candidate, but he comes out of the same progressive ecosystem. He matters because he shows how the same politics becomes easier when it's packaged better. And once a polished version wins, the party can no longer pretend this is a fringe problem because he represents the polished version. He's Jewish, yet he's anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, free Palestine. He defeated hardcore leftist Dan Goldman. Jamie and Michaela, I know you both know he is Levi Strauss, one of the heirs. He was one of the lawyers in Trump's impeachment. There is nothing far left that's bad enough for him to say. The problem is he didn't openly condemn Israel, where Landers has openly condemned Israel, which is why they find him acceptable. And real quick, before I start getting your responses, Landers to me represents the frog. In The Scorpion asks the frog to carry it across a river, promising not to sting, but midway across stings the frog anyway, dooming them both, with the frog screaming, "Why? Why?" That's the Democrats. That's Dan Goldman. Why? Because it's in their nature. And this DSA group, made up mostly of non-Jewish, non-Anglos, will betray and get rid of everything outside of their purview from that perspective. His victory speech, he pledged to be one of the Jewish members of Congress willing to stand up for Palestinian human rights, despite the fact Palestinians say they want to eradicate not only Jews, but the Jewish state, or rather, not only the Jewish state, but Jews. He's described Gaza through the lens of genocide. He's appeared at mosque and pro-Palestinian events where the Quran says, use your enemy and lie to your enemy. Landers appears to not realize that. And his campaign has been tied to the Mamdani DSA ecosystem. So with that said, a couple of questions. What does it mean when a DSA endorsed candidate can beat an incumbent such as Dan Goldman in a primary? And Jamie, I specifically would like to hear your response to this because I see Landers as he was one of these establishment cats who saw the writing on the wall, an opportunity to beat an established hardcore progressive leftist and then easily defeated him. Your thoughts?
Well, elections are about who's running against whom, and I think we're potentially seeing, an election cycle or a group of election cycles that are geared towards new voices on both sides of the aisle. Regardless, we have Byron Donalds here running in Florida. He's a former, or he's a U.S. House member, and African American, very strong Trump endorsed candidate. Of course, Democrats are going to do everything they can because of some of the things you mentioned. We have a major split in the Democratic Party happening here in Broward County in a congressional seat where it's an historically African American seat, and Debbie
Oh,
Wasserman
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Schultz is seeking the Democratic nomination. Our nominating contest is at the end of August, so there's still a lot, and it's a short period between about 100 days from the August primary to the general election. So that's going to be really interesting, I think, from a national level to see um, how much, because you mentioned kind of the split in the Jewish voters are looking for someplace to go because it
Mhm.
is pretty apparent that Democrats are turning their back on them in a big way, and they're not ready to join the Republican Party because of their distaste of Trump. We'll see if future, someone like Byron Donalds can either collect the African American vote or the Jewish vote here in Florida, and I think that'll be something to watch very closely because there is a shift in the Democratic Party from I think from a traditional coalition sense.
That makes perfect sense. Real quick for the audience, Byron Donalds is seen by many as he should be the next governor. What's your take on that whole governor? A little inside Florida politics here. What's your take on the governors? And what's your take? Is there enough African American support, Black support to coalesce around one candidate to defeat Wasserman Schultz? And for the audience, Wasserman Schultz was redistricted out of her district.
In the congressional seat, there's a real possibility. There's kind of a split vote. So if people decide to coalesce or a few of the candidates drop out, Washington Schultz obviously is very powerful. She's a former chairman of the Democrat National Committee. So in a 4 or 5 way race, she has a great chance of winning it. And it's one of those things where Democrats have to be careful. Be careful of what they wish for him because they can be damned if they do and damned if they don't in that particular district, which really could help tip the state. Right now, the one thing that Democrats have going for them in Florida is that David Jolly is a former Republican who's effectively won the Democrat nomination. He has picked Gwen Graham, daughter of famous and very still well liked Democrat U.S. Senator Bob Graham from Air from the Washington Post. And and she is very strong in North Florida, where Republicans generally garner a lot of Democrat votes. So it will be interesting to see if the Trump coalition in Miami continues to hold with Byron Donalds and whether the North Florida coalition stays Republican or flips to Democrat because of Gwen Graham, which is really kind of an undercard. People really probably won't hear much about throughout the election, but it could make a big difference in Florida. And the other big difference, William, is that because our primary is so late, Byron Donalds does have the lieutenant governor of Florida running against him, and he has a former Speaker of the House running against him. So there's two viable Republicans in the race for the primary. So there's a real possibility for a split on our side as well as we go towards the general election. So I would not say it's a foregone conclusion that Byron Donalds wins, but he is doing everything that I would recommend that he do. He doesn't call me on a daily basis, but he is running one heck of a campaign, and right now it's a campaign that looks like it's headed towards victory.
Right. His father's Panamanian, which is I am. See, look at the difference in skin tone. Nobody would think that now. He doesn't talk about his father as much. He talks about his mother raising him, etc., etc. So, is the DSA becoming a faction inside the Democratic Party, Michaela, or is this just a shadow party within that party?
Yeah, I really think so. I think there's a huge shift going on from the traditional Democratic Party into the Republican Party. And it just, they're, how powerful it's really becoming. And it's really dangerous. I mean, how they're going into this and, on a little bit on, the anti-Israel thing, they're starting to tie domestic socialism to extreme foreign policy, which shows how identity and grievance is now driving the left.
Yes. Yes, most definitely. Jamie, so going back to Brad Lander real quick, is this proof that the establishment will drift toward the DSA lane when it thinks that lane is more electorally compatible with them. Because when you think about human nature, we want to win desperately, and the seven sins kind of proves that we will do anything at times for that win. Is this just
I think we're a few election cycles away. I think we saw something similar in throughout the United States on the Republican side in around 2010, 2012 with the Tea Party. And for the most part, many of those candidates, while they may have stayed very strong conservatives, they mostly joined kind of the establishment. Um, a lot like I've seen AOC sort of kind of get into the mainstream Democratic Party, that she seems to have moderated her message to have be more effective member of Congress rather than, kind of the extreme left that she was touting out in the world earlier. Not to say that she's changed her views, but she certainly has changed her approach. And being a member of Congress and having to work within your caucus does change some of your rhetoric. And so uh, I think that will take a couple of election cycles. I think they'll show out strong and loud to start, but we'll see how they are accepted among the entire caucus.
Jamie, do you see that? I see that more bringing Mowgli into the city and civilizing him, and they learn how to work within the framework. And part of it's because they never had any true beliefs of their own, and they start to adapt to the civilized way. Meaning, AOC's come in, she's become they're like, we don't like you, we don't care for you. If you give a little, we'll give a little, and we'll keep you a rising star. It's That's kind of how I see of her. Whereas the Mamdani group, it's all still city based. It's also local based, where AOC's gone national. And before you answer that, do you see AOC's original politics coming up as having planted the seeds to give us the Graham Plattners and the Abdul El Sayeds of Maine and Michigan?
Yeah, I think that, she's certainly the tip of the spear. Bernie Sanders and AOC are, I don't want to say exactly two peas in a pod, but they're along that same ilk. And I think AOC has a real shot to be to have some legs in the presidential race. I don't know how far she'll get, but I do think she has a shot to a lot like Marco Rubio in 2012 or 16, whichever year it was that he kind of came out and started his presidential aspirations and then fell short. And then I don't know that she gets there this time, but I think that she can utilize it to gain more of a national audience. And elections change things. So the 2026 and 2028 elections will be a big deal. And Democrats have to go all out in all three of these elections, including 2030, because in 2032, presumably, if we have a fair and transparent
Right.
census,
Very close.
there's going to be a major shift from blue states to red states that is actually counted. Florida was denied two congressional seats that we felt like we earned in 2020, and it looks like we will get 3 to 4 this next census if it's fair and transparent. I think you'll see the same thing in Texas and some other Republican states that could really spell. That's why it's kind of funny to see the DSA's graphic that says, "Oh, they want all this congressional power," when
People are
congressional
fleeing.
power is fleeting.
That's right. Well, they're fleeing, yes. And honestly, guys, I'm in a minority, but I will stand by this belief. AOC is Kamala Harris 2.0. She will have support in the urban cities, in blue states, but when she starts speaking, she is as dumb as a rock. And to me, epitomizes our university system of writing your degree because you paid the money and graduating. She's supposed to be an econ major and doesn't know anything. What I learned in my lifetime with politics with the Democrats, the media will make you or break you. They haven't broken a Democrat in 30 years now, but they have made AOC who she is. They've covered up for her. They've given her lifelines multiple times. But when she's on that debate stage, when she's on the campaign trail, it's going to be as bad as Kamala 2.0. Michaela, talk to me about Graham Planner with what you said before in terms of what you see. He fits the same broader pattern as of anti-Israel politics, being rewarded by in a democratic environment. And then you have Abdul El Sayed, who is a fundamentalist who refused to sit there and say what Trump did in terms of Iran was good because he doesn't want to upset the people who support Iran and hate America. Yeah. Do you see this type of mentality beginning to permeate more and more in individuals your age and younger?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that kind of goes back to, a lot of the people that I've talked to my age is they don't know, they see the Democrat party's policies and they can see how the cost of living's higher, the cost of gas is higher, the cost of everything is higher. They still can't buy a house. They can't, go out and have, live comfortably, especially in a state like here and, many states across the country. And so they're trying to, instead of saying, hey, maybe it's these policies that are doing this, they're looking and saying, well, look at this. They're going to give us, free healthcare. They're going to give us rent assistance. They're going to give us all of these things. So, they're shifting more towards this, socialist idea, especially not knowing the history of where it actually came from and how those kind of establishments, fail.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and so they're shifting more towards this new, policy. Well, it sounds great, but if you actually look at the details of it on paper, you'll see, it's not going to work out. It's not sustainable.
And what I call that is what Obama did. When you promise hope, that's what they're drawn to. The hope of being able to afford this, afford that. What about the anti-Semitism? Do you see that growing, or is that mostly a leftist ideology? I mean, it being promoted and pushed by the mainstream media right now to help support some of these candidates. What do
No,
you
I
see?
see I see it growing. It's not just a leftist thing. It's definitely on the Republican and conservative side too. There's a huge divide going on. It kind of started last year, even before the Charlie Kirk assassination, and then now I'm seeing it even more so after that happened last September. And it's kind of splitting up our, the Republican Party, which is it's scary because we were already, so thin, and so we have this inner fighting going on about that Israel topic. And so it is a problem. It's a problem
I,
every.
I'll be honest. I looked at some of the polling, some of the data. Perception is truth in the eyes of many, but when you break it down, most people are still aligned with Trump and the MAGA movement, and that you're specifically referring to Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, and Candace Owens spewing their anti-Semitism. And the data has shown that Tucker, a lot of his traffic, a lot of his views is all out of country. Megyn Kelly's losing 20,000 people a month. They don't talk about that. They only want to talk about the Daily Wire losing views and subscribers. And that's because Ben Shapiro was right. Nobody cares at the end of the day about Megyn Kelly. So they don't talk about, well, you lost 20,000 viewers yourself last month. And Candace Owens, I think, is kind of her own worst enemy. Jamie, going back to your decades of just living, I look at it from life, my decades of life as well. I'm not picking on you because I'm in the same boat. I have never seen the anti Semitism this high in my lifetime, at least online. And it's so openly stated. You had that Graham Plattner who's talking about there's a Nazi symbol there, the supporter. There's a Nazi symbol by the no, 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 no. What about Israel? Oh no, no, no. Those are vile racist people, or something like that. It just blew my mind. She literally turned around what we've always thought of Germany and put it on the Israelis. Your thoughts with all of this?
Yeah, I agree with Michaela. We have a candidate running for governor. He's the fourth candidate. He doesn't have a chance. He's
Fishback.
yeah, I'm not going to mention his name because it shouldn't be mentioned by anybody. Because I sat in a crowd and listened to probably the most racist, anti-Semitic speech I certainly have ever heard live in my life, and I probably would have to listen to radio broadcast from 1939
Mhm.
to hear something as racist and anti-Semitic. And so I feel like as Republicans, we have to stand up against racism and anti-Semitism, um, even when it happens within our party, especially when it happens within our party. And it is frustrating to see that people are trying to make a platform out of that. Like, if even if that's is what you believe, which I can't agree with, but if even if that is what you believe, to you are running for a political office to either participate, or if you're running for an executive office, to run the government. Whether you're running for president or governor, you're running to run the government. And so part of your plea for votes has to be that you can be an effective CEO to run the government. And I refuse to believe that someone is capable of doing that through aid. And I just can't understand why that is such a big part of some people's platforms.
Oh, I agree. And my whole point was Thomas Massey, for example. I mean, he had every anti-Semitic person hooping and whooping for him, and he got crushed. And I think the anti-Semites, at least for the Republican side, the conservative side, is not as big as the perception of it is. And we're seeing that with so much dominance from Donald Trump's endorsed candidates. But I agree wholeheartedly with you, Jamie. I won't say his name, even though I did mention briefly, because you are correct. So I don't care how much I hate a person because he's pro Latino this, pro black this, pro this, and wants to do away with everybody else. I'm not going to stoop to the level of what that candidate has said. And some of these candidates do believe they can win on that platform. But it seems like the Democratic Party is truly in a battle with us. You saw Dan Goldman get ousted. And please say I'm wrong after this comment if you believe it. I believe Dan Goldman is one of the most hardcore leftist progressives within the Democratic Party, and he wasn't leftist enough for the DSA. Am I wrong to look at Dan Goldman in that avenue? Either one. Any thoughts?
You're not wrong.
That's what I thought. And real quick too, because it triggered what I wanted to say, and I want Michaela's response to this. Jamie and I grew up, Michaela. I, as a child of the 70s, he was probably a teenager in the 70s. Uh, when it was racist, the KKK, you can walk down that street, but I'm turning my back. I'm shutting my doors. I am not going to give you an opportunity to spew your hate. That is a conservative Republican mantra, not a Democrat or progressive mantra. Now, and please don't feel this as if it's an attack, but I'm sick and tired of conservatives, especially the young ones. Well, no, everybody needs to be heard. We can hear what they have to say and we can learn from it. No, that's stupid, ignorant nonsense. Because I know what these people are going to say. Everything's Jews' fault. Everything's Israel's fault. It's genocide. It's this, is that. I know they're going to say that. And I know it's not true. So why should I give them a platform? One of my previous co-hosts said, hey, if we get the chance to have Nick Fuentes on the show, we should have him. And I immediately said, no, I don't care how many more clicks he would bring, how much he could elevate the this platform for more views than that. I refuse to bring him on. That's how Jamie, and Jamie, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm assuming you're in the same boat I am and how we viewed it. But yet now we're seeing, no, no, they should, it's okay for Tucker to have interviews Fuentes. It's okay for Megan Kelly to have brought this person, that person. How are we wrong?
Yeah, I mean, William, yeah, I could disagree with you, I guess. I'm a little bit different. So I've done a lot where I've actually gone out to protest into these people, and they're, very extreme leftist ideology that they have. And I just try to talk to them. I want to hear their perspective on things and, ask them questions. And it's interesting because when you do that, you realize how little they actually know about our government and our founding and history, and it's amazing. And you know, I, I, not younger, but actually older people, and they were how uneducated they were. So I'm I feel like talking and, opening up that dialogue and having that conversation, it's what leads, if we don't have that, I think it's going to lead to civil war. I mean, I think we're already heading to a modern day civil war as it is, but shutting down conversation. I'm all for talking with them. I did get screamed at a lot. People call me a racist and a
Michaela,
bigot.
what does a civil war look like to you? Like,
I
if you
think,
say you were headed towards a civil war, what's that look like?
yeah, I say modern day civil war because I feel like it's going to look a lot different than, a traditional civil war that we had. I think it's more, along the lines of what we're seeing now with, people attacking each other, people, throwing out all these name calling and threats. And I think we're going to start seeing, in California specifically, I really think we're going to actually see parts of the state try to split off, and it's going to start locally. It's going to start locally in our cities, and people are fed up with the other side, and it's so divisive nowadays, and people are so against each other. I think it eventually.
Hold on, Michaela. I mean, what you're saying is already happening, so that's not really a civil war in your mind. Uh, putting you against a corner. You can't leave this corner until you answer the question. What is a civil war in your mind? Because you did reference it.
Yeah, I think what we're gonna see is the states starting to split off, whether that means, against the United States, or against, some of these blue states, splitting up into, a lot of Republicans and
We've
Democrats.
seen the movement in Oregon, in Eastern Oregon to try to join, a neighboring state there. I can agree with you a little bit if you're talking about people moving. We certainly see that here in Florida. Florida's population isn't really growing as much as it was with Canadians and northeastern liberals. It's mostly with red Republicans moving to Florida to flee blue states. So it's I think people. I don't know that it's as much as a war as people will move to where their political philosophy is embraced. Many people are leaving California due to just the future collapse of that government potentially.
Right. And real quick to push back a little bit, Michaela, you're right. But do not confuse the Jamie Millers with the hippies of that protest, of the protest movements out there. Which, and I truly believe this in my heart. All those people out there are hippies from the 60s. They finally get something to sit there and to march about. I mean, you go to some of the King's days, there were all blue haired hippies out there. I do not, you see, it's not older generation, it's Democrat progressives of our generation. See, you made the mistake there, and please, I'm not picking on you, but it's human nature. You clumped all the older generation together. That's not true. Most of the older generation can become progressive because they haven't saved a dollar in their life, and all of a sudden the thought of losing Social Security forces them to vote Democrat. Because so that I can see happening, but I think part of the problem that they're so stupid is because of our next segment, education. I believe we are indoctrinating our kids, and it starts now at the elementary school level. How do I know? My friend who is, and I've said this story before, maybe you even heard it, Jamie. My friend who is from El Salvador went to his teacher's meeting. Devout Catholic, this man is, and he did not know how to react. Contrary to belief, most Latinos, we don't have the machismo that you see in movies. We're strong, proud people, but we follow law and order. That's why we fled to this country. Well, I didn't per se, but why he came to this country. Nothing but pride. Elementary school. This kid was like fifth grade. Nothing but pride everywhere. No American flag. When he asked about the American flag, she said, well, we don't have a use for that one here. We think it's more important for the kids to understand what America's about. And him being the law and order, the teacher knows best, but he was so angry. I mean, I'm done with my meal. He hadn't even started it. He was so angry he just had to vent. So I see it happen there. I've seen it happen with my nephews and nieces in junior high. And my belief is by the time they get the high school, they're ready to bloom. And by the time they hit college, they become full-fledged communists and socialists. And part of the reason in college is every Tom, Dick, and Harry has a damn liberal arts degree. They tried to push me into a liberal arts degree. And I said, well, hold on. How's that going to help me in the business world? I want to learn business. Well, everybody has a business degree. What did I get? I got a business degree because I wanted to go into business, but they're not pushing people into that. As Stephen Colbert and the late great Charlie Kirk used to say, "Prove me wrong. Where am I wrong with my thought logic?" We'll start first with oh, Jamie. Before you answer, your thoughts on the divide there in terms of how I said you and I we just don't give racists a platform, and Michaela's like we want to hear everybody talk. Thought process. Where do you stand with that?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that, at some point your integrity and the integrity of your show there may be a financial cost to that. And I commend you for number one, realizing that, and number two, taking that financial cost on the chin, by,
Right, right,
and I've kind of done the same thing here in Florida with this fella who really doesn't deserve a platform. And the Republican Party of Florida had a invitation open to him for their state convention this week and rescinded it. And I commended the state party chairman for doing that, because just because we have the right to free speech does not mean you have the right to taint the brand.
right.
Just because you drink Coca Cola does not mean that you speak for the company.
Right, exactly. And then Michaela, to me, I see that's a generational shift where I think your side is wrong, you think our side's owed and wrong. And I do mean it that way because I'm at the age now where you boomers, I'm not a boomer, but I know what you're saying. And if you got off your ass and actually created your movement and actually voted, all these longtime boomers wouldn't be running the country today. That's how I really look at it. So it is one of the few times I will chastise my nephews, my nieces, you, everybody. I'm not saying I'm right. That's how I feel and what I believe. But the good thing about our party, we can have these disagreements and still come together. The Democrats, you out. So Jamie, your thought on my beliefs of the education system and how I described it, because I do believe that's where it starts and that's where it ends.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of fun right now to see, number one, everybody for the most part. I know, and it's funny. I've met somebody from Maine here the other day, and who was on vacation. I said this. I was like, it's so great to see everybody kind of embracing America 250. And he's like, "Well, not in Maine, we're not." I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, and he's just like, "Man, it's just still all rainbow flags and DEI, and it's really not the what you may remember. I remember as a child, the bicentennial in 1976. Just the swelling of enthusiasm, of patriotism, and I kind of see that. It's kind of fun to watch the World Cup um, guests come from other countries and really realize that they've been sold, that their media has lied to them about
Oh, yes.
America and Americans, and just that when they're running into just Americans on the street, that their experience is completely different than what they've been told their entire lives. I saw an interview with a 60 something year old guy, and he's down in Miami, and he's like, "Yeah, what do you mean? Like half people don't even speak English down here." He goes, "That even makes it more American,"
Yes.
and he was just kind of really embracing um, you know, people who are out embracing America.
But
So
Jamie, Jamie,
I do believe I always have faith. I'm always optimistic. I do think, Michaela, we have to be diligent and fight hard and make sure that our messages are resonating. It's kind of easy to have a bumper sticker mentality to be like, oh, let's freeze rent, let's freeze electric prices, let's all these great things, and or they sound great, like you suggested, but
but Jamie,
implode upon themselves.
so you described outsiders. That was nice and pretty and dandy. And yes, I remember 1976, my whole neighborhood made up of a lot of Latinos because being service member, my dad being in the special forces community, they were all married to a lot of Latinas, a lot of Panamanians there. But why is it that the American kid is so anti-American and all these outsiders? Again, is it specifically the education system? Is what I'm trying to get to here.
I think it's a combination of education, entertainment, Hollywood.
Correct, correct.
We're bombarded with messages. They're bombarded with more messages in a day than you and I were bombarded with in a year.
Correct.
as 8 and 10-year-old children. And so it's constant. It's video games, it's television, it's cartoons, it's teachers, it's the whole gamut of things.
Right, right. So, Michaela, just to take what Jamie said real quick before I get your responses. Jamie's correct, but I think Hollywood comes after, not video games, because video games are used to babysit your kids. And I'm a gamer. I'm old, and I'm still playing games every now and then. So I've been around since the 70s with the old the old computer games and going out to putt putt the arcades. So I've seen it, and yes, they indoctrinate. So Jamie, you did change my mind a bit. I still think though it's 90% education. I will say this: 60% education, 40% gaming. Michaela, how am I wrong, or is that how you see it? How do you see it with your generation?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's, mainly 90% education. These kids are getting trained to see like our system as oppressive, and they're looking at unfairness as the enemy, and not to they're being trained not to critically think or build anything. So no wonder why so many young adults struggle with motivation and look at the government for this fairness instead of creating their own opportunities. So I mean,
Right.
what do we see when a generation is raised on grievance? What does that look like as adults? It looks like people who cannot critically think their way out of economic pain.
I completely agree. And we didn't even discuss, like in LA County, black and brown kids, the smart ones are graduating at an eighth grade level. Then they get pushed into the universities with scholarships, and then they drop out. Harvard kids dropping out after 1 year with $100,000 of debt. So not only did they not get help by the system who professes to help them, they have to leave the university system in debt. So it is such an ugly system that we're looking at. So identity politics, all of that stuff has come into all of this. It's being used by the Democrat Party very heavily to push and promote their messaging. But what about the privileged kids, Jamie? Mamdani got elected with the help and demographics showed the black vote did not really go to his candidates, but he got a lot of money and a lot of support by those upper middle income and rich white kids with a few minority rich kids sprouted in there. So it seems like a movement that's not even coming from the working class group, but being pushed by the youth vote. Because on a national level, Jamie, you are right. The numbers just aren't there. But this is the beginning of the seed sprouting. Your thoughts on where you're seeing his support or that movement support come from?
Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend to understand New Yorkers. So, it I think I resonate with Californians more, if that tells
But
you
it's the
anything.
same thing here, Jamie. They get a lot of Democrats in general. There's no denying they get that youth vote. They get that young college kid who tends to become want to be the radical, right?
There's no question that I think across the board, people are frustrated with where we are economically right now. We elected President Trump because of the economic success he had in his first 3 years before COVID hit. And we hope to see that replicated. And to some degree, it has not. Part of it is due to the inflation under the Biden administration. Some of it's due to some of his own kind of tariffs and war with Iran. I'm not saying that any of those things are right or wrong. I'm just saying that they're impacting people's pocketbooks and their daily lives. And when somebody can go to the gas tank and gas pump and gas is 50 cents a gallon more, and you need a tank of gas every week, if it drops 50 cents, you get a pay raise. That might impact whether a family has fresh fruit or decides to get canned fruit that week. And
Mhm.
and I've lived that a lot, when my children were young. And you have to make those tough decisions. And when people are feeling that, and they feel like, they also see on one side of the ledger people becoming billionaires, and now it's apparently our first trillionaire. And it it people look at that and it's like, well, things are fundamentally unfair regardless of how much that person has contributed, how many trillions of dollars that someone may have contributed to the economy to gain their financial wealth. But um, it doesn't change the fact that if you're having trouble, going to and from work or fixing your car so you can get to work, car parts have gone up. All of those things impact people. And so I think that we've seen just as much of, uh, I think the rich people who are liberals are voting in folks um, will, who are kind of using those talking points, those populist economic talking points.
I completely agree. Is that kind of how you see it? I mean, honestly, it's that's how Obama got elected. The Black American, the plight of the Black American. He gave them hope that never came. He did more for LGBTQ plus than he did for the Black American. Donald Trump was the first president, and not many people know this, where the wealth gap started to change. The working class started to see improvements in their pay raise, their wages, the McDonald's workers' wages to the mid-level executives started to go up. And for the first time ever, the executive wages were not rising. Biden came in, it went back to that norm. So you are right, Jamie and Michaela. You said this earlier. It's the day-to-day living. So is that pretty much how you see it too, Michaela, with the added caveat of what Jamie said, which is so important, is the rich use those talking points to kind of cement power. But in the Democrats' case, they really haven't improved their lives. And the Democrat Socialist Party says that they will improve their lives. Is that how you see kids gravitating towards the Mamdanis?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see a lot of these privileged kids, becoming the loudest anti-capitalist because these radical policies give instant moral status and without earning it the hard way. It's easy, and they don't have that motivation to do any of this.
All that talk between
I
Jamie and
like I
I
like
and
how you
Michaela
put that,
gives the
Michaela.
exactly.
Instant moral. I use moral authority, but I love how you put that instant moral status. Like I think that's incredibly important with young people right now, is because because of this mindset change because of iPhones, and they need instant gratification. And I think you hit the nail on the head.
I was gonna say Jamie and I babbled on there for 10 minutes there, and boom, 30 seconds you give
I
the
know.
best
Just
answer.
step out of the way. Just step out
So,
of the
so
way.
let's stick with you, Michaela, there. Immigration. I view immigration as they want to bring everybody over illegally, get them dependent on the government. But then there's dependency politics in general, just promising even the average American free stuff, free stuff, free stuff. Isn't this pretty much their game plan to reinforce, to bring these two factions together, to reinforce it and build their Big Ten? Isn't that what the plan really is? That's kind of backfiring because they actually have brought no the hope they were telling people actually hasn't come to fruition.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's their goal. And I mean, their goal is to bring, these immigrants in. And, it's that, many people, like we were talking about, many people today can't pay their bills and they're being taught to resent the system instead of understanding how to thrive in it. But I really think their goal is to bring in, these immigrants and have that dependency, because I think those two kind of reinforce each other. Um,
No,
yeah.
you're right. You're absolutely correct. Jamie, is that what you've done with your vast orchids of orange fields there? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So, Jamie, for you, is the party building a durable majority? Right. It seems like they are to an extent, but it also seems like because they've not brought results, they could be overtaken by the fringe groups. Again, you don't see this happening nationally right now. I get that, but if this continues with hope and promises not fulfilled, does the fringe group have the ability to overtake it, or will their own promises not be able to come to fruition?
Well, I think part of the immigrant issue, just to touch on Michaela's point, goes back to the 2030 census. They were trying to build 10 or 20, 30 million people in the United States, so they wouldn't lose a lot of not only to gain voters in states, but to make sure they didn't lose congressional power to red states where everybody was moving. So I think that's an important um, point that there's a several level status to or motives behind their um, the illegal immigration that we saw.
So, Jamie, take your quick sip there, and let's keep moving here. I'm finding myself. I wrote this vast outline, and a lot of it I'm realizing may have been a little bit repetitive, just from slightly different angles. So, I want to keep moving here. So, going back to the original talk, it started with Bernie in the '90s, and then Obama, et cetera, et cetera. When did the fringe stop being the fringe? To the point we get Mamdani, Democrat, socialist elected. What was the tipping point that saw that happen?
I think it was probably the Citizens United U.S. Supreme Court case when the U.S. Supreme Court said that um, that corporations could act as people politically, much like unions could act
Oh,
like
yeah.
people politically. And what ended up the negative impact of that and the practical application of that is every rich person in America basically formed their own political party, and therefore the fringes. That's when we very first started seeing the fringes create their own political party, and you know it 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 goes
Well,
against
hold on,
conventional wisdom.
Jamie, for the audience, by political party, you mean PAC,
No, I
correct?
mean political parties like Republican and Democrat. So, but they were able to create. Yes, they were able to collect. They were able to create their own political committees instead of incorporating within a political party. And it was political parties that kept the fringes on both sides
Mhm.
from the tail wagging the dog. And that's what we're seeing now is you see these fringe elements, that get elected. They try to the tail wags the dog for a little bit, and then at some point they either join the establishment, are defeated, or they become the norm. And so we have to see what happens on the left. uh when the Tea Party started that in 2010, we saw that kind of mostly get incorporated within the establishment of the Republican Party. So we'll see how history plays out here with the Democrats.
Well, Michaela, your chance to educate in school two individuals here. Why do establishment, because history has shown this to be true. Why do establishment parties so often underestimate the radicals inside them? Let me twist that comment up to, why do establishment parties so often underestimate the youth? Because at the end, history has shown they tend to be the power behind the radicals. Could be a leader who's older, could be a different kind of leader, but it's the youth that allows that leadership to come take power. What are we missing here?
Well, I mean, I think, the fringe stopped being fringe when institutions, schools, like the media, party structures, they stopped pushing back and started absorbing the language for this short-term gain. They thought, this establishment types thought they can control the fire. And, once you reward people most willing to reject that American norms, they set that tone. We've seen this for years in California, and, progressive policies sound good until you live with the results of these housing and business costs and family budgets.
I agree. I think we're not. I think the greed, the seven sins, the greed being the most prevalent with politicians. They love making promises and never delivering results, and that wealth gap has become so bad. And I put the blame on both parties. And Jamie, you may disagree with me. I don't know, but I see the John Cornines. I see the John Thunes. They don't even seem to try. Now they may be correct in certain ways of the rules of the Senate, but overall, you look at their 20-year careers, you're like, what have you actually done? And then again, now the Ted Cruz's can fall along those paths. It just seems like the system is built not really to help us, and our side seems to be of not much use at times. Now, school my generation based off of your experience in politics. How am I wrong?
How are you? Is that to me?
Yes, yes. I mean, am I wrong in how I'm looking at it? Because there seems to be that's how it goes.
The way you presented it, you could argue that what I suggest is true, that some of these folks started out as much more conservative, like AOC started out more liberal. And, as she got into the system, realized that to build a successful coalition, she had to moderate. And so that happens on the Republican side as well. Whether that's right or wrong, we don't like it looking from the outside looking in, but it certainly is part of how our founding fathers developed the system so that radicals wouldn't take control of the country.
I agree. So let's do the final segment before we close it out. And I apologize. It was my fear. We're at not my fear as a host, not you guys. But how do we sit there and take advantage of this as Republicans? Because most blacks have not voted for the socialist agenda. Latinos are slowly drifting our way. They tend to be men on both of those demographics. But Trump arguably, and I say arguably because I don't have the data in front of me, I want to say actually did create probably the biggest tent in Republicans in bringing all these demographics together outside of the white suburban woman under the Republican tent. And it seems like between him and the John Thunes of the world, we are squandering that away. So how do we take advantage of this fracture in the Democrat Party? I'll come to you next, but okay, let's start with Jamie here because I want your perspective from the younger side because that's who we needed to go after. I think Jamie.
Okay. So, I think both parties have their own challenges that are both similar and different. There's fractures within both parties that potentially could be long term and permanent. And so we'll see how it plays out with our leaders. I do think there's an interesting story I read um, this week on LinkedIn that came from an author who suggested that we would skip Generation X as a president. We won't have a Generation X president unless
What
it's
age group
one.
is that?
What's that?
What age group is Generation X?
That would be me. That
Oh,
would be
gotcha.
kind of,
Okay.
I would say that Ron DeSantis may be, kind of the youngest Generation X.
65 to 1980 is Generation
Yeah,
X.
yeah. So anyway, um, so I think there's some interesting generational politics that are happening, as well as these pressures from within both parties, from both the right and left within the respective parties. So um, it'll be interesting because I think we are in this moment of potential political realignment.
All right, Michaela. Somebody said, Michaela, I'm going to give you $1 billion if you can properly answer this question. What does the Republican Party need to do to capture the youth that we seem to lose every single generation? That old saying is what we count on. You're a liberal until you get your first bill or whatever that saying is, or when you become an adult. What do we have to do to get in the game and with the
Well,
youth?
I do think that with the rise of this, socialist party, I think Democrats are losing control. I do think the Republican Party does have an advantage if they do it correctly. If these radicals keep winning, there's going to be nobody left that's moderate. So, Republicans have this real opening, but only if we can build a coalition around, what actually works and what actually is going to solve the problems, what's going to solve, the problems with the economy and the costs, because, and being able to build that American dream. Otherwise, we are going to see a lot of younger people, especially my age, kind of shift more towards, the left radical socialism side. But I do think there is that possibility because there's going to be no more moderate Democrats anymore. That
That's a good
that
point.
disappear.
It's
That's a
it's
damn good.
interesting. A year ago, I wrote a Substack on reasonable arguments when I was writing that, William, and when we first met, and I wrote about how GDP per state was very different between red states and blue states, and how the national numbers are skewed downward because of basically California, New York, and Illinois. And any positive economic news basically comes out of Florida, Texas, and Ohio. And the rest are kind of somewhere in the middle. And so it'll be interesting because I think as people start realizing that there's more economic opportunities in places like Florida and Texas, and there's uh, lessening economic opportunities in places like New York and California, I think you'll see people, vote with their feet.
Well, they're already doing that, I think, Jamie. The point is, I don't know what your point is, but my point is the media doesn't talk about it. New York has lost millions. I did a previous podcast, had those numbers. California, I know these numbers. They've gained 1.8 million, 98% of those being illegals, but they lost 1.6 million of the working class. So when Newsom says, "Oh no, we got more people coming in than we do leaving," and the mainstream media pumps that up, he fails to tell you the context of it, including businesses leaving. So I think that is, or that is, I don't think it is already happening.
You're losing taxpayers and bringing tax takers.
Exactly, exactly. And I think what you said, which is so important, this is a great example of what I'm referring to what I call the rhino class, the importance of stopping the illegal invasion that Biden pretty much put at its apex and supporting these laws and using monies instead of 120 million on John Cornyn getting elected, maybe more towards voter registration or more towards funds for the legal courtroom fights to win some of these battles. Because if we can win this 2030, oh gosh, I'm trying to blank of the counting, the census, then I believe you will see a complete shift. Guys, any final words in terms of this topic? Actually, I do have a final question. Plattner and Syed. You may not know much about Syed because they've been really on the down low with him because he's so far out there. Anything he says is a big negative. But Plattner's been out there. Jamie, you got the most experience with this. You may know Susan Collins for all I know. You've been around so long. Do you see her pulling another hat trick like she always does and defeating Plattner, or do you think Plattner could be the star on a national level? Him and Syed of moving forward with this. For I guess my question to you is, Syed and Planner, do they win or will they be defeated?
Yeah, Collins wins.
Syed, no thoughts. And he's kind of like
Uh,
you may not know much about him.
I'm not, yeah,
Okay, fair enough. No, no, fair enough.
Collins
Fair enough.
wins.
Michaela, what do you know about those? Have you followed them? Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, and obviously I'm not involved locally over there, but from what I'm seeing, I'm a little concerned about Plattner winning. Well, because of a few things, Susan Collins has done. So I don't know. I don't know. I guess we'll see.
I'm with Jamie. Every time I thought that woman had a chance of being defeated, she comes and wins by 10 points. And if Plattner's greatest claim to fame right now is, I'm a ladies' man, really beating women, denigrating women. That's what y'all call a ladies' man. He's also the best form of why you don't get a tattoo when you're drunk. But only problem is he wasn't drunk. I think Susan Collins will win that. I don't want to say easily, but she tends to win by 8, 10 points every cycle. All right, guys, before we leave, Jamie, tell us a little bit about where I don't know if you're still writing, so I apologize. But if not, tell us about your better half and what she's doing with your
Yeah,
previous
Jennifer
work.
is doing great. She's still writing reasonable arguments on Substack. I always say she's a much better writer because I would just pontificate on politics, and she actually researches and writes in depth, kind of more journalistic style. She also does a cool YouTube called Paw Per View, PURR View, where she live streams our cats and has tunnels out in the yard and has a feeding table for squirrels. They have little tents they can go out and watch the animals. So she does that. That runs 24/7 most of the time, and and then she's turning that into an iPhone game,
Oh, good for
a
you.
maze game. So she's got her hands full, and you can see a lot of great things. I would like to say before we go, Michaela, it has been just a real pleasure getting to know you a little bit here today, and I'm so glad that you've decided to lend your voice to our movement and to try to make our country a better place. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
Michaela, tell us a bit where we can find your work. 'Cause you're everywhere. So where can the people find your work? This is your chance. Pump it up.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Michaela Swaney. Pretty much, I'm on all platforms under that name. I also put out legislative update on the California Federation of Republican Women's website under Capital Updates. And personally, I'm actually developing a lot of different videos to try to educate, my generation, and honestly, any generation, on the founding of our country and real history.
Yeah, it's funny you say any generation because when I was a young pup in sports, for those of you who know sports, Denny Green, rest in peace. I was at a press conference as a youngster with my newfound company, and I asked him a question, and he got so offended at me asking that question. He ended the press conference right then and there, and it was at the combine. So because he's like, I don't have anything to learn from anybody at the conference. So, but Jamie and I are more receptive. But you're right. When you say any generation, the older Republican generation needs to take a hard look and a hard listen. And with all due respect to the Confederated women, at least in California, the ones that I've met tend to be my grandmother's age. Rest in peace, grandmother. So to see them get new blood, such as yourself, also gives us hope out here. And with that, my friends, that is our show. I am William Del Pilar. This is Grumblings Media. You can find our work on YouTube under the profile Grumblings Media Politics. Grumblings Media Politics. Jamie, I separated all the channels now to their specific topic. And on Rumble, you can still find us under Grumblings Media. Until next time, my friends, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe and stay fired up. Hey, everybody, this is William Del Pilar, founder of Grumblings Media, and I want to say thank you for watching our content. If you want to support our all volunteer efforts at Grumblings Media, smash the subscribe button right here. 100% free, and please consume and share our great content. Click either one of these two boxes for more of our work.